What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right. So before I get into this video, I want to give a big shout out to the brother Brandon Wallace for the donation to the channel via the Cash App. Much respect to you, brother. Also want to give a shout out to the man, the myth, the legend, the brother Robert Mason, one time again for showing love, and the brother Erving for showing love with the donations. Salute to you all. So in this particular video, man, I want to talk about Julius Erving, but his ABA career, which I don't think people truly understand how great and dominant he was as an ABA player. He was the Michael Jordan of the ABA. He was the Michael Jordan of the ABA in the 1970s. They pretty much created the slam dunk contest for two reasons. Number one, to try to save the ABA, which I'll get to in a moment, and to feature their best player and to showcase his skills. Now, the main reason why the ABA ultimately failed is two reasons, in my opinion. Number one, the owners were giving the players way too much money, at a time when they couldn't afford to really seriously pay those guys that type of money. That's why so many NBA players are going over to the ABA, because of the salaries. I think part of it too was the ABA was giving the players more money per season, but the contracts were shorter. So these players weren't locked into these 6-7 year contracts. So I think it was more around 3 years. Plus also, the ABA players, especially some guys who are young in high school or in college or whatever, there was an exception, a hardship exception made, if I'm not mistaken, where you could forego, because, the NBA had this rule where I think it was, where you had to wait 4 years from the time you left high school to get into the pros. The ABA waived that. The ABA waived that with the hardship. Ultimately, these contracts hurt them because they weren't making the money over, and more so with revenue and ticket sales. And also they were putting a lot of these teams in cities that weren't really basketball havens. Some of these cities were more, and the states were more football, football towns or states, or like Kentucky, the Kentucky Colonels. That was, those people were Kentucky Derby and college basketball nuts. So, the game didn't really have much time to flourish. They had too much competition in other sports. Some even were, the time baseball havens. And then sometimes they were competing against other NBA, the NBA competitors, and they weren't able to flourish. But in the 8 years that the ABA was around, their biggest star, and they had some stars, don't get me wrong, was Julius Erving. Julius Erving, coming out of Massachusetts college, he averaged 20 and 20 in college, but his game, he didn't really stand out at first because he wasn't really a great shooter. And in the midcourt, sometimes you didn't see the greatness. He wasn't a great mid-range shooter, so his game didn't really resonate with the way basketball was played back then. Basketball was a more conservative game. People say, oh, these guys didn't have left hands. No, it didn't. It wasn't that they didn't have left hands. It was that back then the NBA was far more stringent when it came to ball handling. Like, these guys could be called for travel every time. They didn't allow players to do that. The one player that opened up the game, by the by, for the NBA was Pete Maravich. It necessitated the NBA to loosen up their rules because Pete Maravich wouldn't have been able to be showcased if they had to keep with the contingency of the extremely strict ball handling rules. But if you notice, you look at the 1970s, they're able to do a little bit more with the basketball than they were in the 1950s and 60s. Some of it was the development of skills, but a lot of it had to do with them loosening the rules. But getting back to Julius Erving, man, the ABA was where he was able to showcase and shine and truly put on a show for people to showcase his genius, his brilliance out there in the open court. And he wasn't alone. You had other high flyers, you had Connie Hawkins, you had, David Thompson, obviously. You had other high flyers out there, but the Duke of Dunk was none other than Julius, the Doctor Erving. I mean, the Doctor, that was his nickname. He made house calls on tops of people's heads. One of the things I remember about Julius Erving, too, when you look at his highlights, Vince Carter may be the greatest all-around dunker as far as power, as far as vertical, as far as aesthetics and all of that. But I noticed when Julius Erving dunked on people, sometimes it didn't look like he was going to do that. Like sometimes like he might attempt a layup or something, man. But the guy had hands as big as bear claws. So allowed him to be able to do so many things with the basketball that other guys couldn't do, Also, sometimes like he was climbing some invisible stairs when he would just stop for a fraction of a second. And then all of a sudden he would just elevate and elevate and elevate. Where other guys would kind of launch out from farther out. It's like Julius Erving didn't need as much room. Like he would just stop for a fraction of a second and then just elevate and just power dunk over. And he was dunking over some of the great shot blockers. Remember that back then they had trees. They had Bill Walton and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. They had Artis Gilmore. You know what I'm saying? You had guys that were phenomenal shot blockers. And he was dunking over these guys. Easy. Making shots over them easy. They came into the ABA with the Virginia Squires. And, but he really showcased his talents after some legal issues in the NBA and some brief flirting with the Milwaukee Bucks and Atlanta Hawks organizations. Almost played for Atlanta Hawks. But he really showcased his talents with the Brooklyn Nets. By the way, I know Kyrie Irving scored 60 points in the game against the Orlando Magic a couple seasons ago. Really, the franchise record is still held by Julius Erving. He had a 63-point game in the ABA. It was a triple overtime game. I think they lost, but still, he really holds the franchise record. But Julius Erving, just a phenomenal player, man. And I'm gonna put out his ABA numbers. Now, mind you, he was only in the ABA for 5 years. 5 seasons now. 5 seasons. To make a comparison, LeBron James has been with the Lakers for 5 seasons. This is his resume in 5 years in the ABA. 2-time ABA champion, 2-time ABA playoffs MVP, 3-time ABA MVP, 5-time ABA All-Star, 5-time All-NBA first, 4 times All-ABA first team, his rookie year All-ABA second team. The last year he was on the ABA All-Defensive first team. Keep in mind that for his entire career, when you include the ABA and NBA, he had almost 2,000 career blocks and almost 2,300 career steals. 3 times he was the ABA scoring champion, including, I think, a career high in 1972-73 when he averaged 31.9 points per game. He won the inaugural ABA Slam Dunk Championship, with the free throw line dunk, which is something we had never seen before at that time. His number 32 retired by the Brooklyn Nets. He's on the ABA all-time team, and he's considered the ABA all-time MVP. His career stats, as far as the ABA is concerned, are phenomenal. This is a man that routinely in the ABA played over 40 minutes a game, including leading the ABA in minutes played, 1972-73, playing an incredible 42.2 minutes per game. The last 3 years of his ABA career, he was the MVP. And in his second year, he was the runner-up MVP. In his ABA career, he averaged 28, almost 29 points per game, over 12 rebounds, almost 5 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks, on 50% shooting from the floor, and nearly 77% from the foul line. In the playoffs in the ABA, he was even more impressive, averaging over 31 points a game, 13 rebounds, 5 assists, almost 2 steals, almost 2 blocks, on 52% shooting from the floor and 80% from the line. Think about that. In the playoffs, he shot 52% from the floor. This is a guy that they say didn't have a jump shot, but does it really matter if you're not the greatest shooter? If you can be efficient? If you can be efficient, does it really, really matter? And he did have a jump shot. He had a jump shot. By the way, he led the ABA in PER for 4 consecutive years, as well as the NBA 1979-80 season. He led the ABA in offensive win shares his last 2 years in the ABA, led the ABA in defensive win shares his last year in the ABA, led the ABA in win shares 3 consecutive years, led the ABA in win shares per 48 3 consecutive years, including 2 years in the NBA. Led the ABA in VORP 3 years in a row. Led the ABA in BPM 3 years in a row. And led the ABA in OBPM. I forgot what that means. For 3 years in a row. So, I forgot that stat. It got something to do with the box score. But the fact remains, he's by far the greatest player, man. He's like, you can even argue he was more like a Michael Jordan and Bill Russell. He was so unbelievable. And after the ABA-NBA merger, when so many players went over back to the NBA or went over to the NBA and they absorbed 4 teams, that being the Nets, the other one being the Spurs, the Pacers, and the Denver Nuggets. 2 of those franchises have won championships now, the Nuggets and the Spurs in the NBA. Julius Erving went to the Philadelphia 76ers. And of course, he went to the NBA Finals his first year there, ultimately losing to the late, great Bill Walton and the Blazers. But he went to the NBA Finals quite a few times. 1977, 1980, 1982, 1983. So, if I only won it all in 1983, one of the great NBA teams of all times. So, yeah, this guy is one of the greats. And when you look at his ABA career, you could definitely make an argument that he's a top 10 all-time player, maybe even higher, if you really look at his all-time numbers. But anyway, tell me what you guys think.